month, we went over handbook and compliance. We've recently covered hiring, onboarding. We did a brief HR audit. This month, we are hopping into compensation and classification. And when I see these topics, I'm like, oh gosh, this is such a good one. But I know not everybody is bananas about HR like I am. But I do know that this is something that every organization, whether it's a small business, mid-size, large, without a good strategy, this is one of the largest risk areas inside of a business. It's one of the fastest ways that a small business can get themselves into trouble, whether it's legally, financially, or even just culturally without even realizing it. So most small businesses are flying blind in this area. And when it comes to pay, when it comes to performance, when it comes to cost of living adjustments, raises, where to hire people at. And when you're guessing, usually that means three different things. You can accidentally create inequity, you can increase your legal risk, and you can frustrate your team with most of the time without knowing it. Sometimes you do know it. We're in a moment where employee expectations around pay are continuing to shift drastically. One of the research studies I saw out of Bamboo HR recently said only 72% of employees report positive feelings about their pay. That's the lowest that we've seen in years. And we know as small business owners that sometimes that's because of the economy. It's not necessarily our fault. It's not like we're not paying people well across the board. Sometimes it's just because of inflation. And so they're viewing things in a different way. But sometimes it's around the transparency around our pay, how we get there, how they can understand how to grow, what means more pay and at what time. And so this is a great area to have some clarity and to take control. So the goals of today, we're going to talk about how to correctly classify your roles, whether it's exempt or non-exempt. We're going to talk about how to talk in a transparent way. And I recently did, if you don't follow my podcast, it's called Don't Waste the Chaos. I recently did an episode around pay transparency. Most of the time, people think that means we're just acting like we're the university and we're sharing what everyone makes. That's not true. It's just how to talk around our compensation strategy, whether it comes to when we're recruiting a person or during performance management. We're also going to talk about how to build a compensation structure using a 4-level performance framework. This dovetails directly into performance reviews, and then how to really communicate about pay in a way that builds trust and not tension. I think most people stay away from talking about pay because they're afraid it's going to create some kind of tension. And you don't have to do a show of hands. Just think through, like, how confident do you feel that every single person on your team is classified correctly as exempt or non-exempt, and they're paid well in a way that you would feel proud of to share with others. And if you're like, mostly, but not everywhere, then this is perfect. We're going to jump into it today. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the difference between exempt and non-exempt. This is usually the biggest liability. And I would say in the past, I've been in an organization that tried really hard to do this right. And we had a disgruntled employee. They were listed as exempt, so they were paid salary. They were disgruntled. They contacted the Department of Labor, and they were actually misclassified. And unfortunately, this meant that that employee and then every employee classified like them, and we had about 13 of them, they were able to go back, and there is a statute of limitations, but it's bigger than I thought it would be. They were able to go back and guess about how many hours they had worked every week. There's almost no checks and balances to this. They just got to guess. And for every hour above 40, we had to pay, of course, a fine and time and a half. And it was a really, really healthy amount that we had to pay all at once. And it caused us to go back in, and essentially what had happened was there were a number of roles that we classified as exempt because that organization did not want to make professional level people clock in and out. So they had said, like, these people are exempt, they're salaried, and their heart was in the right place. They thought that that was, taking a burden off the employees and treating them in a way that they thought they'd want to be treated. But the reality of it was, when the classification test based off of the Fair Labor Standards Act was applied, they should have been non-exempt hourly. So they qualified for overtime, and we got fined because of it. So most of the time it's like out of a good place. I've got a construction company right now that's doing the same thing. They're like, we just pay everybody's salary because the reasoning is in the winter, they want everyone to always make their pay. This is a retention thing that they do. So they're like, we don't want them to get paid less because we want to keep them over the winter when work gets slower. So we have them in the summer. But I told them, like, I understand that's out of the goodness of your heart, but we're misclassifying them. We've got to find another way to retain them over the winter because calling them an exempt employee and paying them exempt salaried isn't appropriate. And they've essentially said, yeah, we don't care. If we get audited, we've got all of these records to kind of tie them back to a job and show that they're not working over 40 hours. And that's what I'm here for, is to present the risk and then let a business owner make their own decision. I still think they're making the wrong choice, and job costing could look a lot cleaner if they would pay them hourly and attach them directly to jobs, but that's ultimately their choice. And as a business owner, you need to know the information and then apply it the way that you see fit and just be ready for any potential ramifications that come up. And that's kind of the beauty of being the business owner. You get to make the choice, but you need to be well informed. And what we talked about last month when it comes to compliance, and we talked a little bit about it during our HR audit call too, is that the burden is on the employer to understand the way this works. And if we don't, we can't cry ignorant later and say, like, we just didn't know. It's ultimately the burden falls on us. And so this is something that we really need to understand. Misclassification is the number one compliance risk for businesses with fewer than 30 employees. This is the number one risk of all, whether it's work comp claims or what have you, regardless of industry. It's the number one risk out there. When you get above 30, it's still in the top 3 risks. So this is something that's not done correctly. Like, in general, you're not alone if you're not doing it correctly, but we're going to jump into it a little bit more today. The consequences are not small. Misclassification can trigger both federal and state investigations, like I mentioned, with back pay, liquidated damages, civil penalties, and even class action results, depending on how many employees it impacts. Workers who are misclassified can lose tens of thousands of dollars in overtime and in unemployment protections because it pays out differently, let's say if they lose their job. So we just need to make sure that we're getting this right. And there's a few things that we can look at to make sure we're classifying correctly. And real quick, I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to show you something that I'll send to each of you when we get, when I recap the call and post the recording. I have got the criteria from the Fair Labor Standards Act from the Department of Labor that I will send you for exempt versus non-exempt standards. And so I just recommend that you read through this, but this is at a high level what we're going to jump in today to make sure that we're covering it. So I'll focus on 3 primary areas. There are 6 that are the criteria, but we're going to focus on 3. If one of these fails, the role is non-exempt, not exempt hourly. So the first is a salary level test. This is changing in some states. Every year we update minimum wage qualifications most of the time, which means then we're also updating this exemption threshold. Employees must meet the federal minimum salary threshold. So if you want to pay them exempt, they have to make at least $684 a week. That equates to about $35,568 annually. But there are multiple states that have higher thresholds. Missouri's not one of them. Everybody on this call right now primarily operates in the state of Missouri, but for people listening later, California has a major difference. It's much higher. And New York, Washington, Alaska, Colorado, Maine, they all have higher thresholds for this too. And all of those thresholds are going up in 2026. So we have to meet the minimum salary threshold first. The second is the salary basis test, and that is pay must be consistent each week. You can't dock pay for partial day absences. This is a common illegal practice that businesses do. You can require that they utilize PTO. So if you offer vacation, if you offer paid time off or paid leave, you can require that an exempt worker utilize that for their work. But let's say they're out of paid time off or you don't offer that. If they are an exempt employee, you cannot dock pay if they've worked during the week, and most employers are doing that incorrectly. The third is a duties test. And this is where most small businesses fail because we treat our folks like a jack of all trades in many ways. And so we just say like, oh, they're doing it all, so they're going to be exempt. There are 4 major areas that I want to point out. And that is the executive exemption. So they manage others and they have responsibility over hiring and firing. They've got an administrative exemption. This is high-level office work. This is not just customer service. This is not just bookkeeping. High-level office work that requires independent judgment. And the one that what I usually say to people is, do they have decision-making authority? And do they have personal implications to the bottom line? Could they make a decision that has an implication to the bottom line? That's a pretty good administrative judge. And then there's the professional exemption. This is learned or creative professionals. Think of people who have technical degrees for these roles. They hit that professional exemption. And then outside sales. So if a person is regularly away from the company location making sales, there's an outside sales exemption. So the red flags that I see all the time, my office manager does everything. And that's one that I hear often. A lot of times office managers are not exempt because they're really acting as somebody who's ordering office supplies, doing some receptionist type duties. If they don't have hiring and firing authority, if they don't make all of their decisions autonomously, and if they don't have decision-making authority, like if they don't have things that they're regularly making decisions on that impact the bottom line, they're usually not exempt. If you say you've got a supervisor or a team lead and you're paying them exempt, but they don't schedule or they don't hire or fire, they're usually not exempt. Even though they're in a supervisory role, if they're not able to change pay of a person, hire a person, fire a person, change their schedule, things like that, they're usually not exempt. And if you pay them a salary and you want to pay them by a salary, that doesn't always mean they're exempt either. They've got to hit these exemptions. And so a non-exempt role, here's what it requires. It requires overtime. And we all know this. After 40 hours, unless your state differs, it requires time and a half. It requires accurate timekeeping. So a lot of times we'll pay people in a non-exempt role for a certain amount of hours. We have to have them track their time, because otherwise, how do we know that they qualify for overtime or they don't? And along these lines, we talked about this a little bit during the hiring month, but if we aren't doing accurate timekeeping, then how do we know we need to hire another person? A great way to know that we need to hire another person is if we've got a person or a chunk of people consistently performing overtime. Now, we need to take a look and see, what are the overtime standards? Are they wasting time? There's some other things that we need to look into when it comes to that. But if we regularly have employees that are executing on overtime, this isn't pre-approved. This isn't something that we've said this team is going to operate on overtime. We need to hire a person. It's a good indicator. We also need, when it comes to non-exempt, meal and rest break compliance. So our salaried staff, we don't have to do this, but when it comes to our hourly staff, we really need to make sure that we are setting clear guidelines. And one of you on this call, we just talked about this recently, but what is the meal? What does it look like? Is it 30 minutes or 1 hour off the clock away from your work area? And then at least the 2 breaks, do you go above and beyond that, articulating that so that way you can monitor, hold accountable, and discipline appropriately to your meal and rest break compliance. So think of your highest risk role right now, one that you're like, oh, I don't know if I have this classified. What is it that's making you nervous about that classification? Are they not hitting one of these criteria? Are you not monitoring meal and rest breaks? Are you not doing accurate timekeeping? That's a great takeaway on what you need to adjust when you get off this call to dig in and take a look. If this made you realize that you've got misclassifications, I recommend going into this compensation data study with me as a separate project, but I'm going to walk you through how to do this your own today as a little DIY. So that way you can either invest your own time, invest my time, so you can save money later on a potential misclass. So let's get a little bit more into pay transparency, raises, and equity. Like I mentioned earlier, compensation expectations have shifted, and Larger corporations are keeping up with this better than small businesses. And I think it's easy for us as small business owners to say, well, it's harder for us. We're a mom and pop shop, or we're multi-location. So we've got all of these smaller businesses and it's harder for us to compete. If we want to recruit and retain, we have to. We just have to have some intentionality when it comes to our compensation philosophy. When I was looking into some transparency data around pay, 32% of organizations publicly have committed to pay equity. 20% of organizations have adopted pay transparency practices. This means posting pay ranges, sharing their compensation philosophy. This was put out by the World at Work research. Despite this, though, we all know the data. Women typically earn 83 cents for every $1 that a man earns in a role. And this is not a knock on males in any way, shape, or form, because in a lot of ways, women don't negotiate pay. But at the same time, if we aren't being intentional about our pay, then it doesn't make sense. If we've got a pay range set and we just pay a woman because she's not negotiating, then we don't really have a pay philosophy, do we? We're just kind of letting the market, letting the people, the individuals set what it is we're paying. And that puts us at a risk for retention later on down the road. Pay transparency can do a lot of different things, but one of the things it can do is help the gender wage gap by around 45%. If we just put a structure in place, then it would help with this. It's going to help with a lot of different things, though, not when it comes just to men and women, but in general, pay equity across the organization. One of the things that I hear often is, well, this person's been here for a long time, so they're making less than what I pay a new person coming off the street. And my initial reaction to that is like, okay, let's not do that. Just because we got a deal on a person who's been with the organization and they've been with us for over 10 years, over 20 years, that doesn't mean that we keep paying them at a lower rate. And then we've got to be competitive with these new people. These folks are going to talk eventually. Or you're going to get pay transparency, you're going to post pay ranges, which is where most organizations are going. And then your pre-existing people are going to see, I've been here for 15 years, but I'm being paid at the bottom of the range or at the mid of the range. And so it does cause some frustration, which is why a lot of organizations are like, I don't like pay transparency, but wouldn't we rather just pay our people at the right standard and feel confident about our compensation structure and not have to like hide? I understand that it costs more in our minds. It costs more at a salary level, but it's going to cost us more in retention and cultural issues in the long run if we aren't just being equitable. Pay transparency is no longer optional. And I would say, even if your state doesn't require pay transparency, which right now Missouri does not require us to post job ranges, candidates do require that. Without clear pay structures, you end up with pay gaps, arbitrary raises, internal distrust. A lot of times what happens is we've got a person who says, I got a job offer elsewhere, and they're offering me, 8,000 more than what I'm making here. If you don't have a pay philosophy, and you don't have good hiring practices, you're going to be like, okay, well, gosh, I guess I just have to compete with that. And there's a number of things that should go into that decision, like what's their performance and what is the pay range? What's the band? So people who are also in this role, what's that look like? Where does this person fall within the band based on their performance? And now, is this a person that I'm willing to fight for versus just being kind of dictated to? And then later, we all know what happens when we overpay a person. Then when performance reviews come up, immediately we're like, we don't want to give them an increase, but their expectation is cost of living has changed. So they want and need an increase. And we also think in our minds, well, we start expecting more out of that person because we gave them an increase. Unless we're changing their job description, we can't really expect more out of them. This is an us problem versus them problem. And so this really gets into being intentional and clear about what our structure looks like. So from a small business perspective, what are some of the ways that you can exercise pay transparency? That would be publishing ranges on job postings. And if you don't feel confident to post your ranges in your job postings, that's probably because you don't have a good structure internally. You're not being intentional about it. And this is as simple as just seeing everybody who's in this job title. What's the lowest paid person? and the top paid person. And for the lowest paid person, if somebody didn't have any experience, would we want to pay a little bit lower on entry? That's the bottom of your range. And for your top paid person, are they paid unrealistically because of X, Y, and Z? They've been with the company, they're somebody's uncle. You know what I mean? Like, we have to think about these extenuating circumstances. Should it be more or less than what that top paid person is making? If it's less, we've got another conversation, but that essentially sets your pay range. Your lowest person, and if they have little to no experience, that's the bottom. Your highest person, top of the range, that's the start of your range. It gets a little more scientific than that, but that's, in general, you've got pay ranges. You maybe just aren't publishing them right now. I'd recommend you use consistent guidelines around this. So a 1 to 5% when it comes to raises, sorry. So if you're going to give an increase, typically we're doing somewhere between a 1 to a 5%. And I think it's 2 or 3 calls from now, we're going to go into performance management, and I'll talk you through the Likert scale, which is a 5-point rating scale that I recommend for performance reviews, and just attaching numbers to those. And so that way you score your people, it spits out an average, it attaches to what your increase is, and it's science, it's math-based, it's not arbitrary. And now we get to a lot more trust in our organization. COLA for 2026 is projected to be 2.8%. So we all know this means if we don't increase our people by 2.8%, they essentially took a loss on the year. So we need to take a look at, do we want to keep up with that? And if we don't, our people are likely going to be looking. So it's something that I encourage everyone to do, but not just arbitrarily giving these increases if people aren't performing. If you've got an underperformer, don't give them an increase. But if people are meeting expectations or performing above that, a good meets expectations increase. For example, for 2026, if COLA, cost of living adjustment, is 2.8%, then I'd give people 2.8% or 3% if they're meeting expectations. And for me, that's a score of a 3. That's that middle of the range. If they're scoring above and beyond, maybe you give them a 4% or a 5% increase. So that's what I mean for a 1 to 5% typical role increase for a raise, unless it's role expansion, additional responsibilities. You need to define what good performance looks like before talking about salary discussion. So if you haven't clearly defined what meeting expectations is in your organization, this is a hard conversation to have. It's hard for me to even guide you. To me, meeting expectations in my organization are high. I have high performance expectations. This isn't just scraping the bottom of the barrel. This is meeting and bringing value to my organization. So I clearly define that and let my team know a 3 or a meets expectations rating means you're meeting high expectations here. This isn't something to say like, oh, I'm an average performer. It means you're living up to my expectations, and my expectations are high. So being clear with those from a performance management perspective is really important. So let's talk a little bit about raises in general. Let's get a little bit deeper about this. We want to build a process, and we've talked a little bit about it. We want a process, not a gut reaction. There are 2, in my opinion, legitimate drivers of raises, and that is market movement. So we've reevaluated the role, the market has shifted. And let's say, for example, it's a really hard to recruit role. I know that I've got an accounting firm on here right now, and right now hiring accountants is hard. It's very, very competitive. And so there's a market movement of those positions. So we have to analyze what the market is kind of dictating to us to recruit for a position. If we're in a, let's say in a geographical location where it's really hard to recruit, or if we're having to compete against, we want in-seat people, but we're having to compete against remote employees, maybe we have to give a pay bump. So there's reasons why we need to take a look at what the market is requiring of us, not just benchmarking, but what the market is saying to us. And then the second legitimate driver, in my opinion, is merit. They're knocking it out of the park. They are the go-to person in the role. They are leveling your organization up. They're bringing a ton to the table. We've all got doers, worker bees, bee players that are doing the thing, and we're really happy to have them. They're reliable. But our A players that deserve a higher merit are people who are changing the game for us, bringing new ideas, innovation, helping us stretch, looking at new ways to implement things, looking at ways to save the company money, looking at new ways to bring in company dollars. So these are the people who really deserve a merit increase. They're not just being reliable, they're bringing their A game to the table. When it comes to raises, I recommend you stop doing surprise raises to keep someone happy. If you've got somebody that you're nervous about and you're like, I'm just going to give them an increase because I want to make sure they're happy, this is not a sustainable practice. And I'm saying that it probably sounds silly, like, oh, we're just throwing money at people to make them happy. Everyone does it. It blows my mind how many business owners do that. I'll have a CEO say, this person feels like they're a risk to me, so I'm going to give them an increase. And I'm like, oh, okay, that may be true. Let's talk about why. Is this a hard to fill position? Is it because they're holding your organization hostage with information and won't share it, so we're just going to pay them more? Well, that's actually bad behavior that we're rewarding. We need them to write work instructions and standard operating procedures and cross-train other people. That is an A player. That's a team player, somebody sustainable. We don't want to give more money to a person that we're so afraid that they're going to leave because they're holding us hostage and it would cripple our business. That's not a good reason to give somebody a raise. So I know that's kind of like harsh information, but this is things that I see, especially small business owners do very often. I don't want to get in and learn their process. I feel a little held hostage to them. So I want to make sure I'm paying them above market. I'm going to challenge you on that every single time. That is not why we're going to give a raise. Now, if they are awesome and bring new revenue streams to the table and things like that, that's a whole different conversation. We don't want to pay new hires more than existing team members. I mentioned that before. If we're doing that, we need to evaluate those existing team members and rate them accordingly to their performance. If we're like, well, these new people bring all these new skills to the table, well, do we want to train our current employee population with these new skills? I'm recommending that small business owners are hiring people that have AI experience right now. Even if their exact role isn't correlated to the need for artificial intelligence, bringing that comfort level and that skill set to the workplace for office staff, for your more professional staff, is important. This is something where the world is moving in this direction. So we want a reward for that. Well, the people internally that don't have those skill sets, do we want to have a lunch and learn once a month to try to get them up to speed? Maybe our new hires are even leading this lunch and learn to train people. Maybe we're having an external trainer come in and do it. Maybe it's taking coursework through LinkedIn or through a university. But if we're hiring people because they have a skill set that our current staff don't have, so we're hiring new people at a higher rate, we need to take a look at the reason why for that. And then can we get our current staff up to speed? And then lastly, we don't want to match competitor offers without a strategy. So if we're just like, well, this other organization pays this, so we've got to come up. Do we offer benefits above and beyond what they do? Is our culture better? Is our location cooler? I mean, just think through like what it is that you bring to the table as an employer, your unique value proposition. You don't have to just go chase dollars. You'll find people that want to align with your business, your values, your executive team, your management team, your industry. So you don't have to just match competitor pricing without a strategy in place. So here's what I recommend on some things that we can do around raises. I recommend you pick 1 month per year for raises. And I would look at your fiscal year. So I've got an organization right now that their fiscal year is calendar year. And so as we're budgeting, I'm like, hey, you need to take into consideration, if we gave everybody a 2.8% increase, let's take a look at your current payroll spend, and let's assume that everyone's going to be meeting expectations on average. And so what is your payroll spend going to be increased for the next year? You should also be doing this with benefits. On average, benefits increase around 12% annually. I know that stinks, but you should be taking a look when you're budgeting. You should take 2.8% for next year and tag that into your payroll expense. And then you should take approximately 11 to 12%, earmark that for your benefits expense. And that is your compensation expense increase for your stub budget for next year. That's something that we just need to be setting aside and anticipating. Or we need to say with intention, we are struggling financially. We will not be doing increases and for raises. And then we will also pass off any increases on our benefit spend to employees. We're not absorbing that as an organization. That's perfectly fine to do. If you're not in a good spot, don't give away more money and sink your ship, but be intentional one way or another. Earmark the money or say that you're not going to spend it. But what I don't want you to do is get into the year and then say like, oh, okay, we didn't earmark it, we didn't put it in the budget, but now we're afraid people are going to leave. So now we're throwing arbitrary raises just to save people. And now we're giving additional benefits that we hadn't, we're adding 2 more holidays to our schedule just to be competitive. That's not what we want to do. We want to be intentional with our budgeting when it comes to raises, performance management, pay increases, where we're going to hire people at. So when we're looking at this year end, what's growth going to look like? What are those salaries going to look like? Are they going to fall within the pay range? If they're not, why? All of these things for good planning for the next year. So based off of everything that I just spit out, what habits do you need to break? Or what rhythms do you need to set in your business to be sustainable in this way? Did you budget for COLA? Did you budget for benefits increase? Do you have a strategy around this? If you don't, we need to set those up. And if you're doing things ad hoc, what habit do you need to break and get more sustainable in your practices? I think adding, let's say, 3% to your payroll budget probably doesn't feel very good at the bottom line. So you're like, well, we're not going to do that. And that's fine. You just have to hold yourself to it later when you've got 3 or 4 employees or 10 employees that say they're going to leave, and now you're inadvertently increasing. You might blow that budget if you just would have done sustainable increases in the first place. So let's go back to pay equity a little bit. You don't necessarily need a compensation analysis, but you do need a basic audit. So if you want to do this yourself, there's a 3-step equity scan that I'm going to recommend that you do. I recommend that you list out all your employees, first of all. And what I'm going to do is I'll show you, let me show you this spreadsheet that I'm going to send to everyone afterward. This is essentially employee pay mapping. So I'll send you this spreadsheet. It's nothing scientific. I do have a key in here to give you all of these tips of things that I'm going to be telling you. But you're going to list off, and I'm doing this with one of you that's on the call right now, list off every single employee name, all of their roles, and then I recommend that you do the level in the organization. And when I'm saying level in the organization, I'll go into this a little bit deeper, but qualifying every single role as a support task expert, so an entry-level position, or a subject matter professional, somebody who's a little bit deeper into their role, a little more autonomous, or a manager, or somebody on your leadership team. So tying them to a level, this is going to speak into performance ratings later. Next is classification. Are they exempt or non-exempt? And then list their current pay. And then list if they are paid hourly or salary. So you're going to go in and do this, or have your accounting person go in and do this for every single position. And then you can either do this through a compensation data study with somebody like me, or you can do this on your own. And there's some ways to do this from a very cost-effective, and I'll jump in on some of my tips on how you could do this yourself, but you're going to put what a range minimum would be. So inside of a pay band for this role, and you can either do this like I was saying before, if you have multiple people in this role, what's the lowest paid person? That's going to be your range minimum. And then the range midpoint, which is typically the goal of where we want everybody. Typically, we want to say we're going to pay at the median, the 50th percentile on average. If we're paying lower, maybe we're a nonprofit. If we're paying higher, maybe this is a hard to recruit role, or we're trying to be extra competitive in this position. So we've got the midpoint, and then we're going to put that maximum part of the range. I recommend you put their tenure in years and do this as a formula. So put their start date, today's date, and then run it as a formula. So that way you can use this spreadsheet year over year and just copy it. So put their tenure and then their most recent performance rating. And if you don't have one because you haven't been doing this systematically, this is okay. I would just say low, average, or high, just as an easy way to start this out. Are they a low performer? Are they meeting expectations? Or are they a high performer? So put that in the performance rating, and then any notes like I hired this person prematurely. They're trying to earn their way into the position. I anticipate promoting them in the next year. I've had a performance conversation with this person in the last year. They're on a performance improvement plan. Any notes around this role. I need to change the job title. It doesn't match the job description, like any kind of analysis type of notes. You'd put this here. And then based off what their current pay is, just do conditional formatting if you know Excel, but color where they fall. Do they fall toward the minimum? Do they fall toward the midpoint? Or do they fall toward the maximum? Do this with your whole organization, and then you can have a visual representation of where do your people fall in general. This is going to start to inform what is your organization's compensation strategy. Once you do this, the data is going to tell a story without you even trying to wax poetic about how you feel about your compensation strategy or what your goal is. First, let's just take a look at what you're actually doing. Where is everybody right now? Where do they fall on this map? And then that can help you determine, we pay people toward the range minimum because we have amazing benefits. We have a ton of vacation time. We offer flexibility. We offer hybrid work environments. There's a number of reasons why you might pay them a little bit lower because you have a larger benefits package, or we pay them toward the maximum because we don't offer benefits, or we like to pay everybody about the 50th percentile to maintain consistency in the marketplace. Like this spreadsheet, data always tells us a story. And so this spreadsheet is going to be really, really helpful to you as you start to determine what your compensation philosophy is. Can you all see my slides again? Okay. My screen was showing my spreadsheet again. So that is just a very a basic way to jump into this, but it's a way to jump in. We can start to jump in and take a look at who we are from a compensation structure. So you don't need 10 pay grades. I recommend these 4 pay grades. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to go through them in a little bit more detail, but if you have all of these pay grades going on in your organization, it's really hard to map to. So I recommend 4 levels that are aligned to job complexity and decision-making authority to help you start to wrap your mind around this. The cool thing is I say cool. I don't expect you all to think this is cool as I do, but for me, what I've done is taken every role in an organization, put them to these 4 levels, and then I've built hiring guides, so interview guides that match up to this. So that way, every interview is either you pull out your subject matter professional interview guide, this is how you interview them, because it kind of speaks to their level of decision-making authority in your organization. And then you're scoring them this way in performance management as well. So this kind of you get this comprehensive HR structure, which most organizations do not have. I've implemented this at organizations that have 50 people, 10 people, and I've implemented it at an organization that I led that had 20,000 people. This can be done, and it's actually more simple than you would think, and the time is now. Don't wait till you get bigger. The time is now to implement this, and it feels complex to an organization to put this whole comprehensive structure together, but this is essentially what we're doing in HR in a Box. We're building these foundational building blocks of HR, and once you get through all of them, you're solid. I mean, you're going to want to learn and adjust and be agile in the marketplace, but once you put this in place, you're going to feel really confident about the way that you hire and performance management and fire your people, because you've got intentionality with all of it. So let's talk a little bit more about subject matter, support task experts. We'll start there. This is our entry-level employee. They execute on tasks. So this is their role and responsibilities, and this is exactly what they do. It's not like they're coming up with new projects to do. This is the majority of your worker bee workforce. This organization or this group in your organization should have a smaller spread when it comes to your range, your pay range. And that's because it should be really clear. An entry-level person starts out here in this position. When they've obtained or grown in these skills, then they get increased to this. And when they've added these additional skills and responsibilities, they get increased to this. This is usually, let's say, a 15 to 20% max spread when it comes to a support task expert. This is the easiest level in your organization to determine a pay range. And if you haven't done this yet, this is where you start. This is your entry-level employees, because If you can master it for this and get clarity on that, you can do it in the rest of your organization. But the beautiful part about doing this is I did this at a law firm, and we started out with assistants, and then we went to paralegals, and then senior paralegals, and then legal assistant level 4. We put all these levels in place, and this organization, they had this, they knew like, okay, this is kind of, I view this person as entry level. I view this person as a little bit more advanced, and this is a go-to person in the organization. And what I said is, let's give them 3 tiers. So that way everyone has a clear understanding, a ladder to climb, if you will. And that way they know what they're going to get paid. It's not guesswork. People aren't like, how do I grow in this organization? They know, okay, if I come in with this set of skills, I start here with the pay, and then I have to master this set of skills to make more money. And I have to take on this responsibility to make even more money. We want to make this very, very clear for the support task expert. Really, we're going to do this with all of your roles, but that entry level position, that task executor, this is the easiest one to do this on. The second level is your subject matter professional. These are your skilled contributors. These people own processes, and they have a moderate amount of autonomy. So they still have a leader over them, but they're an individual contributor, but they do have a little bit of autonomy to pivot inside of the role. They maybe they're a process owner. They're not a people owner, but they're a process owner. We're going to see more of like a 20 to 30% spread for these people, because when it comes to a skilled contributor, we might have a skilled contributor right out of a certification or right out of a degree program versus somebody who's been doing it for 10 to 20 years. The third level is management. These people supervise someone else. They set priorities, and they train and develop others. And we're usually going to see on a management tier more of like a 25 to 35% spread in that pay range. And then the fourth level is leadership. When we think of our leadership team, I hear so many people throw around leadership, but the truth is, how many people in your organization are really doing strategic decision making at the strategy level? That should be a very limited. When I'm thinking of a leadership team, I'm usually thinking of an executive team. They own outcomes. They have significant accountability when it comes to the impact on the bottom line. This can be a 30 to 40% spread, because usually at the executive level, we've got new executives, seasoned executives, and so it's this much larger spread. These 4 levels are the foundation of recruitment, retention, raise, performance management, the whole system. These 4 levels are the crux for that. Roles are mapped to the levels, and pay ranges align with the levels, so performance and compensation can speak the same language. And if this sounds really complex, I hope it hasn't, but if it does, I am happy to practically go through this with you in your organization. If you just give me the job titles, I can map these pretty quickly and kind of show you my philosophy, and it'll start to click in. If this is a new concept to you, it might sound more complex, but hopefully I broke that down appropriately. So we want to benchmark the market from here. And I talked a little bit about how you're going to take a look at your roles. Take a look at the role and the level, and then that market anchor rate. And here's the tools that I would use. If you're going to DIY this, you can use Indeed's salary tool. You can use a tool called BLS. You can use salary.com, which is what a lot of employees use. And you can use pay scale summaries, ChatGPT, Claude, Google. I would not use one of them. I would use 3 to 4 of them for each role. I'm using a tool. My tool that I use is called it's through Economic Research Institute. They have a contract with the Ultimate Softwares and the ADPs and Pay Scales and Paycors of the world. So they are pulling live day-to-day updated data per job title and job description. And I pay several $1,000s a year for this, but it's worth it to me because I do this for my clients all the time. For you, if you're going to do this, I recommend you do it every year, but you can either do it every year with an outsourced person like me, or go in and do this as a DIY. If you're going to do it yourself, use multiple tools. So like I said, Indeed, BLS, salary.com, pay scale summaries, AI, Google, whatever, pick your tools and check it with, let's say, 3 of them. before you say this is the set tool, because you really should be taking into consideration, and I'm going to benchmark one for you, but you really should be taking into consideration geography of your organization, and you should take into consideration like general tenures of the roles, what your revenue is or your employee population, whether it's just base compensation or base plus variable base. There's a lot that goes into a compensation study, but there are tools that you can use out there. You can totally do this yourself. I would just recommend make sure you're putting in the time for it, or having your payroll person put in the time, so you're not just following everything that salary.com says, because a lot of salary.com's data is put in by employees, and they pull it down from Glassdoor and a number of other online publications that employees, or let's say potentially disgruntled employees, go in and rate employers on. And that's where the data is coming from. It's self-reported. It's not employer reported data that you're pulling generally offline, because as employers, we're not putting our pay ranges out. We're not putting exactly what we pay our people and exactly what the titles are. So this is employee reported data. So there's nuance to it. And I don't totally trust it. But if you benchmark against like 3 different tools, you can trust it a little bit more. So build that range, like I mentioned, your minimum, your midpoint, and your maximum. And let's say for an office manager, for example, if we anchor an office manager at $50,000 in the Midwest, let's say we want to have, let's say a 20% scale. Maybe the minimum is $42,000 for an office manager. The mid is going to be that $50,000 anchor, and the max is going to be $60,000. That's not to say you can't add additional responsibilities to a person, but let's change their job title, their job description. At that point, it's not the same role. But for an office manager, that's just kind of a rough example of what I would do. And then do that activity, like I mentioned, mapping your people. So showing where they map. And then if they're on the minimum, put why they're underpaid or why they're underskilled and what you can do. Are you going to coach them up or coach them out? If they're above the max or at the max, are you going to freeze their pay? Are you going to adjust their role? This is where you start to put a plan in place for the next year to 3 years for your people. You don't have to solve all the world's problems in 1 year. When I do a compensation data study, a lot of times employers are like, Kerri, I can't do all this right now. Like let's say we've got a pretty good chunk of people paid at the minimum. I'm never going to say, let's drop $112,000 and level setting this in year 1. Unless you just happen to have that sitting around, that's not going to be my recommendation. I'm going to give you a tiered approach to shore it up within 3 years. But knowing that every year we've got some variability, this cost of living adjustment and things going on in the marketplace. So we'll have to continue to tweak it. But usually I give an organization a 3-year plan to get their compensation on par. I have never done a compensation data study where everyone's in the midpoint. I've just never done it. Usually it's because there's a bunch of arbitrary things going on in an organization, and that's just facts. That's just the way business runs. We're just making the decisions as best as we can as a business owner. And there's a bunch of different opinions that come into play. But to get everybody on the same page, it usually takes about 3 years when I come in and do a data study for somebody. There's nothing wrong with that. At least in 3 years, you're going to be a lot closer than you were today if you do nothing. Once you get done with this process, then I recommend that you go through and write your compensation philosophy. So once everybody's on the list, you've mapped out where everyone's on the list, then you write a 1-pager, and I'm going to give you a template for this, on what your compensation philosophy is. This isn't to create a Word document that you never touch. This is something that you're going to train every supervisor and manager to help them understand how you come to decisions in this organization. This is you're not going to share it when you're recruiting somebody. You're not going to share it during the onboarding process, but you're going to allude to it. You're going to talk about what performance management looks like in your organization. And maybe if you're paying above market range, you are going to tout it. Maybe you are going to talk about it. But this compensation philosophy helps you understand how your roles are evaluated, how pay ranges are created, how raises occur, and at what frequency, and then what your commitment to fairness and equity is inside your organization. This becomes your North Star when things get emotional, and they do often in business. I would love to say that they don't, but there are emotional decisions that come up, like this is a relative, or, sometimes I'll have somebody say, well, this person has a child with cancer, hopefully not, but we all have people who have hardships, and sometimes we make pay decisions based on that. And I would say we should not. We should not make structural pay decisions based off that. We can do one-time gifts if we want to. We can do things separate outside our pay philosophy, but really nailing down our compensation philosophy and then making it clear, holding our leadership team accountable to it, holding ourselves accountable to it. So that way, when something emotional or subjective comes up, we can say, this is going to throw my whole structure off. And I worked hard to get this structure together. So I'm going to make the next right decision for my organization instead of making yet another emotional decision for the business. If you want these ranges for your market or your industry or your state, I can do that for you in the compensation data study. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into, and I'm actually going to live get into my Economic Research Institute database right now and just show you how I do this. And I'm going to do it with, I had Rebecca sent me a job description in advance for a role. So I am going to log in. I've got screens going on all over the place, you guys. It's like air traffic control here. So here is what my system looks like. And I'm going to hop into Columbia, Missouri. And we can base this either off fiscal year budget or number of employees. And just for integrity's sake, I'm just going to base it off number of employees and I wanted to show you right there. I put in 8 and it automatically, oh no, it's going to let me. I don't know how low it'll let me go actually. Let's let me go all the way down to 5. Let's keep it at 5 then. So the role that I'm going to be doing a study on, just to give you an example, is a controller position. And so I'm looking at annual salaries. And can everybody see my Economic Research Institute screen? Okay, good. So I like to take a look at the job description that the business owner gave me and kind of the crux that it says, the controller working directly with portfolio of clients to drive financial efficiencies, contribute to long-term strategic planning. So I'm looking over here and a controller, this says, heads the accounting operation of an organization's accounting division. Well, it does this for clients, essentially, directs and plans fiscal records. So I'm trying to make sure that the job that I'm benchmarking actually matches, because we all, in our businesses, we title people the way that we want to title them. We don't necessarily always title them appropriately to the market. And so let me see if I can find a controller that fits a little bit better. And Rebecca, do you have will you go off mute and tell me, oh, actually, we're going to go to, I'm going to take this off. I'm going to change it to professional. Let's see. I'm going to change it to accounting services because that'll change. And now that it's showing me the minimum number of employees in an accounting service company is going to be 34. So you've got to take this into consideration. It's going to be for a little bit larger of an organization than what you're working with. So I kind of monkey around this when I'm working on this with a client. I monkey around to see as close as I can get. So you can see the 10th percentile is about 46,000 for this role. The 25th is 65,000. The mean is about 90. And so when you had sent me, you were thinking between 85 and 95 for this role. That would put somebody right at the mean pay. What we could do offline is change it to your revenue of your business. I won't do that while we're on this call with other people, but we can monkey around to see, does it change this at all? But this gives you a good understanding of where your thought process was. It's in alignment with what you were thinking for the position. Are there other, and you can see alternative titles would be a comptroller, division controller. So there's a few different titles that would be similar to this. But when you're doing a benchmarking study, any of you, you want to make sure you can't just type in your job title that you use in your organization and not take your job description into consideration. And most of the time when I'm doing a compensation data study for an organization, I will say, okay, I benchmarked it to this title. Guess what? If you feel like it's really far off from the title, do you have the title correct? Like, is this what you should be titling? Maybe it is because this is the best way to recruit. This is the title that people want to be in the field based off years of experience. But sometimes there's an adjustment to be made. And Kim, when I was doing this recently for you all, that's kind of how, when I was looking at those job descriptions, I was like, okay, this job title versus this job description don't necessarily match up. And so do we want to make some adjustments to make sure that we're hitting the market correctly? Because our desire is to benchmark this to the person in the role, but we need to benchmark it to the role that we need. And then we want to coach a person into the role. So just in general, when you're doing benchmarking for positions and trying to determine what you should pay people, don't think about who you're paying in the role right now, because that's going to skew it. They're underpaid, they're overpaid. There's all of this criteria that goes into it. Think about what the role is that your organization needs, not who's going to apply or who you've got in mind for it, and then benchmark according to that, and then determine if it's a reflection exercise, if the person in the role actually needs that. So Rebecca, I'll give you a second to ask any questions. Are there any adjustments you want me to make on this?
No, I think that's fine. I might have had to search accountant just because, well, you know, our industry is, but they may not be searching with that title.
Yes. And if you put it, you might list it, you mean as an accountant, but the job title is controller. Is that
I'm
what you're saying?
that
To advertise it?
like if someone is searching for this job, they may search accountant, they may not search controller.
Yeah.
So even though that's what we're calling that, like, yeah.
Yeah. If I switched it over to accountant, you can see accountant, usually a controller, they have to have at least 10 years of experience to be considered a controller. That's why the years of experience started at 10. And so that's another thing when somebody will be like, oh, well, we'll take somebody with 3 years experience. I'm like, well, I can't benchmark to that because that's not a job title that in the world, based off of all of the benchmarking data, makes sense for an entry-level person. So if you were going to take a more entry-level person and they are an accountant, then you can see your pay gets lower. That median pay gets lower. But again, tough to recruit for a position right now. So that might be why you might want to be leaning more toward the 75th percentile if it's someone with less experience that you're having a hard time recruiting.
Yeah.
And let's say, just for fun, you were going to let somebody be remote and the person's in Dallas. That changes things here. So I'm not saying you have to do that, but let's say you decided to have a remote person and you pick somebody up in a different state. You have to say, we're benchmarking for Columbia, Missouri, because that's where we're located and we have on-site positions. And so that's our pay philosophy. Or you have a remote controller and an on-site controller, and they're two different job titles with two different pay ranges. Not that you're doing that, but I just want to show, like, when you change the location, it does change the pay. That changed it by about 20K for 8 years of experience because the Midwest is more affordable. But a lot of organizations that are hiring remote roles, this is something that they need to take into consideration. Does anybody else have a role you want me to put in here off the top of your head that you're just curious where it falls? Tony, Kim, do either of you have a role?
A lot of our roles are pretty industry specific, so I don't know if a lumber inspector is on there at all.
So we have, would that be like a wood grader?
Yeah.
And then you all are in Fayette, is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Fayette's going to show up. I don't think Rocheport's going to show up either. So you might have to go Columbia for the closest. And then let's say, so are you all around 50 people?
40 or 40. Okay.
So with 1 year experience, the 10th percentile is putting it about 35.5. Does that seem on par with where you all are at?
Yeah, pretty close. And again, it's a little less on the experience and more on the skill level is kind of where they're at because it's so specific to the species that we grade.
And this says performs regular checks to improve grade and accuracy, inspects all
Mhm.
4 sides of lumber, grades lumber, measures products to ensure conformance to company specs. So this is one of my favorite projects to do for clients, just because there are so many ambiguous things when it comes to people that this is like cut and dried data.
Mhm.
And it makes it a lot easier to recruit and then to have your performance management conversations when you know exactly where people are falling in the range. And if you would say, okay, somebody's been with you all for 9 years and doing this, and the mean of that is about 54,000. And
Mhm.
if someone's falling below that, you're able to say, okay, I do need to give them an increase. I've been wanting to, but I just haven't yet. Or they're not really performing to that level. They're not fully performing the role. So that justifies why you're paying them a little bit lower. So the data is really, really helpful.
Yeah, it is interesting because we only see what other mills around the area. Well, there's not really mills in our area, but in different states that tell us what they're paying. It's all over the place.
Yes. And I think I work with I've got construction, trucking, distribution. I've got a lot of roles like this, like labor roles. And their assumption is that professional organizations don't understand where the compensation structure comes in, but this is pulling from the ADPs of the world that paychecks come out of. And so the data is really accurate. And as soon as somebody updates pay, or let's say goes through a performance review cycle, within 24 hours, my data updates. And so this really stays on trend with exactly where we're at December 2025 as of last night.
Wow.
And it's showing annualized salary trend is increasing these positions about 3.2%. So it's a little over, like if cost of living is 2.8%, these roles, which I am seeing massively in labor fields right now, they are trending higher than annual averages for increases because these are becoming more sought after, harder to recruit. Really interesting. Kim, do you have one that you want to throw out for yours? Oh, Kim froze.
My
Oh.
regional funeral director, but we have so many throughout the state.
And what we would probably do is take each of your locations and benchmark it separately.
Okay.
So that way we can make sure that we're being on trend with each. But let's say Columbia, and you all are closer to 200. So a funeral director with 6 years of experience in the Columbia area, based on around 200 employees that you all have, there's the mean is 53,000.
Okay.
Does that seem accurate?
We're probably a little higher,
Let's take a look at,
but it's close.
if we looked at the state average for Missouri, that
Oh.
increases it a little bit because it starts
It's
to add
really not
in.
any.
And let's look at KC adds just $3,000. St. Louis, ooh, whoops, that's Central West End. That adds on like another $4,000. So I think when we do
Okay.
your all's compensation data study, I probably, especially for these type of roles, will probably check for variance, or we'll benchmark each person and then notate where they're at. So that way, if they fall in a different area of the range, we can have an understanding of why they're above or below.
Okay.
Okay, good. That's the tool that I'm using, and I've been using that. I started using that when I was at Midway USA. And if you all know, Larry Potterfield, who I worked under, he's a very specific gentleman. And we had individuals that were executive team to call center to shipping staff and packing staff. And so we needed a really comprehensive tool. And that's how I found this one. One that would really span the gamut and make sure that we're getting as accurate as possible. So any questions, any comments before we wrap up?
Not at this time.
Okay. Well,
I do have a question.
Yeah.
You didn't mention, so I think you know this, but the common practice in the accounting industry is to not pay everyone's salary, and hence why, like, public accounting firms, you work, 60, 80-hour weeks. Is that because they're qualifying under the professional exemption?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, they're considered like a skilled certified trade. And so that's where they're qualifying, is that professional exemption.
Okay.
Mhm. Yes, and that's at the organization I was at, we were doing that with web developers, and we were putting them under the professional exemption, and they're the ones that we got audited on, and they ended up being hourly. So tech heavy fields that can be certified versus degree program, the state came back and said they should be hourly, which was interesting because I would have thought that they were professional services. We thought we were doing it right. I was just an HR specialist at the time. I didn't know much about it, but my manager was like, no, that's not right. They are professional, but it doesn't, they are task oriented. You know what I mean? They're delegated to, they have a number of tasks. And while they have implications on the bottom line, if they coded something correctly, it's not autonomy that they're utilizing. And that's where they were kind of splitting hairs on it. So it's tricky. I've learned since then. That was in 2008 when we got audited, and it was a painful audit, and we paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it was so hard because we wanted to get mad at our developers because I felt like they were just guessing, and they were just guessing how many hours they'd worked. And I felt like some of them guessed pretty high for overtime, but we had to pay it. There was nothing, the burden was on us to disagree. So, okay. Any other questions that you all have? Any other thoughts? Next month, we're going to jump into time and labor. So time off, leave management. So we'll get deeper into PTO, sick leave, what the mandatory state policies are right now, the leave laws, and then how to manage those. There's some tech integration that we'll talk to, how to do it manually versus tech and things like that. So